Good evening to you and welcome to the Social Newsroom. Now, today, four major things have happened, or at least news on four major developments has broken, and we want to address it today. And with my first guest, I want to address the top three. We'll have our fourth for actually having broken the internet, as we say. But let me start with the top three, and I have Dr. Forgive me, Dr. Abraham Rugo. Now that doctor is with a Ph.D. and he acquired it in Germany, and we have a lot of respect for him. He is the country manager for International Budget Partnerships, Kenya, and he's here to tell us we will need to budget. Dr. Rugo, asante sana for making your way to Semabox and the Social Newsroom. People are joining us online and the questions will be coming in. But today we've had the Finance Bill 2023 being signed into law, or at least assented to, and we want to know what this means for Kenya. We also have a development today. President William Ruto has signed the Supplementary Budget number 2 for 2022-2023, something that really hasn't hit the headlines for many because of the Finance Act. And President Ruto also proposing a new NHIF bill compelling Kenyans to pay 2.75% of their gross pay towards a health cover scheme, and says it will bring equality in payments. So I don't know whether to call that the highlights, but let me read what was posted on president.go.ke. At least this is a word on record for the president. President William Ruto on Monday assented to the Finance Bill 2023 and Appropriations Bill 2023 at State House, Nairobi. He also approved the Supplementary Appropriations number 2 Bill 2023, warranting the additional spending by the national government of 2.9 billion from consolidated fund. Now, this results in the reduction of overall expenditure, it says, by 25.5 billion shillings compared to the revised total national government expenditure approved in the Supplementary Appropriations number 1 Act 2023. Now, excuse me for a lot of English here, but he will break it down into Mwananchi language and what this means for you. The reduction comprises an increase in recurrent amounting to 9.5 billion shillings and rationalization of development spending by 35 billion shillings. The scaling down in spending is in line with the government's fiscal consolidation, it says, efforts in the light of debt servicing payments. The Appropriations Bill 2023 authorizes the withdrawal of money from the Consolidated Fund for the expenditure of the national government. It is the first appropriations bill under the Kenya Kwanza government and therefore seeks to align its manifesto and promises through assignment of actual resources to meet various services and projects. In that, what is true, what is false, what is stories ajaba?
Thanks, Mark. Should have been a more peaceful Monday evening.
Yes.
And a Monday day. Let's start with the supplementary budget.
Right.
What is it? So a supplementary budget is basically a revision of the budget in line with the realities on two fronts. One, there's a change in matters that need to be spent on. And therefore something has come up, you need to change it, and therefore you you adjust your budget from expenditure.
Right.
Or revenue side, you expected so much money, you didn't get so much money, and therefore you adjust because there's only so much coming. So the supplementary budget is then therefore prepared, and one expected there to be a supplementary budget as soon as Kenya Kwanza government came in. Now, which supplementary budget are we talking about? This is supplementary budget for the financial year ending this Friday. So there are only 4 days left. And that begs the question, is the government actually going to spend within the last 4 days, or this is a course correction of spending that has already happened?
Yes.
I say that because 2 years ago, another supplementary budget was tabled in Parliament on the 26th of June, because the financial year of government ends on 30th of June.
Yeah.
And Parliament did make a ruling, if I remember correctly, saying that no supplementary budget should be tabled in the House less than, is it 30 days or 60 days? I forget the actual number of days. because then it does not make sense, because you cannot say something has changed radically within the last 10 days of a financial year
To warrant.
shifting. And therefore, for me, I feel like this supplementary budget is purely a course correction. And even when Parliament, when the chairman of the Budget Appropriations Committee tabled this supplementary budget, he did say that the supplementary budget has come into the House very late.
Ndindi Nyoro.
Yes, Ndindi Nyoro, and it does not give Parliament the possibility to provide any oversight of that. So there, it's very. I strongly believe this is a course correction. This is spending that has already happened. But secondly, the reduction and the increases. Remember, the first supplementary budget that we all had waited for very much was to reduce the spending of government by 300 billion. Because that's what the president had promised. It reduced spending at that particular point, if I remember correctly, by just about 11, was it 11 or 12 billion?
Dismal in comparison to the goal.
Very small. Which technically means then it actually just did, the budget did not shift, because if it was to reduce by 300 billion, that did not change significantly. Then the second supplementary budget, which anyway should have come much earlier, is what now we are dealing with. So moving forward, I think really it cannot be. Sorry, let me say one other thing. It's also clear from at least the analysis we've done that it is unlikely that government is going to meet its revenue targets for the year ending 30th of June, this Friday. I don't know what magic will happen within this 1 week, because as at end of April, out of the 2.1 trillion that was supposed to be collected in ordinary revenue, we had only collected about 1.5 trillion, which means we had 600 billion to collect within, of revenue to collection within 2 months.
Which is impossible.
Which I think is impossible. So the reduction on spending, I'm not too sure corresponds with the revenue that is expected. So two things are possible. That one, the two bonds I think that were issued in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or thereabout could be what is fitting the shortfall, or we'll actually end the financial year without a lot of resources being transferred to different government agencies.
Right.
And as you know, some money for county governments, which backs almost 2-3 months ago, was actually transferred, I think, last week. I think the president.
In fact, the president spoke yesterday, very happy about.
But you see, when you transfer money to a county government or to any government agency, 1 week to the end of the financial year, what are you saying? Basically, you're saying that technically this becomes spending for the following year. There's a whole conversation we can have about how that has contributed to a lot of the pending bills that currently are there. A lot of services not being provided for, and then what you almost are observing across government is a dash to the end of the financial year. So right now, almost, in many government offices, people are not there because they're traveling. They're trying to, to cash out on the financial year before it closes, and the like, which does not necessarily translate very directly to service delivery. Let me come to the.
So in short, just to conclude on the supplementary budget number 2, 2022-2023, it's not necessarily something that Kenyans should flag as either having benefit for them or in the overall picture for the nation.
There are two things. First of all, there's a flagging from a governance perspective, which I have said I think it is wrong to introduce a supplementary budget when it's just a week to the end of the financial year. It just creates a crunch. And many other things, even the process of transferring that money. And if that money was for a capital project, you cannot definitely procure it. And sometimes then, would create space for misuse, as it were, because even Parliament says we don't have time to scrutinize any of the spending because it's really late in the day in that sense. But the second thing is that it still behooves on Kenyans now, from a spending perspective, to actually look at what the money is being adjusted for, because there's been a cut of about 25 billion on development expenditure. That would be expected because a lot of the development expenditure anyway depends on either borrowing or grants that are coming into the country. So if there's a delay, then you have every reason to say this is not likely to happen, so let's move it. But it's increasing recurrent expenditure by 9 billion, which is money that will definitely be spent or has already been spent. Because remember, in the second supplementary budget, there was a fair increase to the office of to the presidency. There was a fair increase to interior. There was also the creation of the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, and a couple of other raft of offices that have been, including the hiring of the CASs and then the like. So that could actually be what has necessitated the increasing of this recurrent spending. As far as repayment of debt, this was going to be a heavy year. Only that the coming year is even heavier, and we'll talk about that a bit. Wow. We were going to pay about 1.3 trillion of the 2.1 I've just talked about, and I like to bring the numbers down. So we had shot to collect about 210 Kenya shillings, if I use that example. And our payment for debt alone was coming...
And this is collection through the taxation?
Yes, taxation, yes. So 210 was what we were expecting. It's what I'm saying. By April, we actually had just collected about 150. My estimation is that by the time this Friday we close down, we perhaps have collected perhaps 1.8, 1.9, 180 shillings. So we'll still miss a certain revenue target. But we were going to pay about 130 of that to debt for this year. In the coming financial year, we are shooting for 2.5 trillion, and we'll discuss that in the finance bill and what that means. And out of that, about 165 is going to debt repayment in one form or another. Unless there's any, restructuring or buying, exchange, or like the discussion today, whether to split the Eurobond payment into different amounts. So what that basically means is that a lot of the money that was going to be collected in terms of revenue was still going to be spent, and therefore one expected, and of course the priorities of the Kenya Kwanza government necessitated a supplementary. So you have to look at it from both sides. How much of the obligations that were supposed to be met have been met, and therefore I think the supplementary budget remains something that needs to be flagged out. Where I work at IBP Kenya, I think we should be finishing an analysis and be able to share it. But then the question is, who will act on it? Right. Because Parliament itself says, it's too late in the day, this is not the right way to go about it, but still goes ahead and passes it.
Going forward,
but let's come to the other two issues. Which is what really should bother us right now.
The finance bill, which has been assented to and is now Finance Act. It's law, basically.
It's law. And
what top of mind? We've heard a lot of housing levy, fuel, taxation, and as well as content creators. This has been...
Those are the top talking points. It's important for us to put into context that the two bills that the president didn't assent to one is what is called the Appropriation Act. So the Appropriation Act is what gives government the power, as approved by Parliament, to spend. And it's an appropriation of 3.6 trillion. Again, back to a number we all can relate with, 360 shillings. And then a big portion of that 360 is financed by ordinary revenue. And I'll explain what is ordinary. So ordinary revenue is largely money that comes from income tax. 49% of that amount is actually expected from income tax. What comes from value-added tax, VAT, what comes from excise tax, and import duty or customs, as you like. Then, so that's ordinary revenue, and that's what we are talking about, 2.5 trillion, 250 shillings. But there are other taxes and rates that government charges. We call them appropriation in aid. Basically, when you go to the Ministry of Immigration, Department of Immigration, you want a passport, there's an amount you pay. When you go to KPLC and you want electricity, there's an amount you pay. Inside that electricity, there is some amounts that go to various taxes and levies. So that's appropriation. So that gives you another extra 38 shillings because it's about 380. So in total, government is planning to collect about 2.89, about 290 shillings. Then there is, so 290, 360, you raise 250 from direct taxation, which is what the finance bill provides for. And then you have a raft of other things that will be charged different rates and fees and what have you. That gives you another 38, 40 or thereabout. But then you're left with a difference, 360 minus 290, you're left with a difference there of about 70 or thereabout. That 70 is what is going to be borrowed. Is a 718 billion that's going to be borrowed. Because that's a deficit. That's your effective deficit. But allow me to say that that is the effective deficit on book. The real deficit is because there is also out of the, so when I come back to the amounts that we are paying, say for the the Eurobond one, about 240 billion, depending on the exchange rate. That is when, if the exchange rate goes up, it's going to get to almost 260 billion or thereabout. That's a principal payment. The rest is all interest payment. But we still have an amount of principal that is due in the coming financial year. Yeah. It's about 850 billion. So effectively, our budget is not 360 billion, it's 440 billion or 440 40 shillings. But what happens is this 850 is rolled over. Right. Because it's principal. But if somebody was to come and say, I want my money now, the government has to factor it in. So in the budget books, we see it, but when it's being published out here, it's not necessarily published. Okay. So let me come back to the finance bill. So the aggressive nature with which you see the finance bill being pushed and which you see the government has really pushed to make sure the finance bill is because of the reality that you have to collect more to have more buffer in terms of spending. We call it the fiscal space. Because the fiscal space, if you're going to spend 165 out of 250, it means you basically have just about 85 shillings. Okay. For which to pay education, to transfer to counties, and to do all those things.
And it's not enough.
And it's not enough. Of course, then you have to borrow. The 718 billion that we are borrowing is equivalent to our development spending. So the spending that we plan on project, capital projects and what have you, and all that. And that's why then you saw this very aggressive situation of trying to raise this money.
And it's being presented as for the greater good. Yes. And it's temporary pain, temporary suffering for future gains.
True, but let's put this in context. I think the Kenya Kwanza language is very much in order in terms of we want to build, build better, establish our country. But I think budgeting is also a factor of reality. It's not just models. And the first reality is the state of the economy.
Which they said they found it in the doldrums. It was in bad shape. Yeah. So that is why they have to take such stringent measures.
I must say that's neither here nor there, because I don't think there's much shift in change in terms of government. The president now is former deputy president. So I think we cannot quite make an argument of not knowing. I don't think that's. And also, the reality is that we were going to pay a lot of money to debt. Yes. And that could explain. But still, there was still tax revenue being collected. So again, we cannot assume. There was still borrowing going on. So the trend has not necessarily shifted. And in the last 10 years, for instance, I've had people argue that COVID made us borrow more. Actually, our analysis shows COVID did not make us borrow anymore. Our trend actually was almost the same in terms of government spending. Because the issue has been that year on year, this deficit, this amount between our revenue collection and our spending has been increasing. In fact, this year, in absolute terms, is when you have the smallest, deficit. Yes. It's been going down. But in that kind of a context, where you had shot for 2.1 trillion, 210, and you're not likely to hit it, is it really prudent to shoot even for a higher target? Okay. 20% increase. So in other words, the amount we expect to raise more is 20% more than all the other. All the other years, when you look at average of growth of revenue, of tax revenue, it's about 10%. So year on year, from last year to this year. Then within the current state of the economy, looking at, businesses are yet to fully recover. The international business environment is quite tight. Our argument was that perhaps this is not the time to try and go very aggressive with those kind of tax measures.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that when you look at all the taxes we are talking about, so let's list them now. When you think about the payee, that has been increased.
And for certain brackets, yes.
It's for the people already within the tax bracket. When you look at the housing levy, it's for people with a pay slip. As long as you don't have a pay slip, you're safe. When you think about even, the announcement, which is the third issue, about to increase NHIF, it's still for salaried people. The unsalaried ones, I think, are supposed to, because the proposal has been out, it's about 1,000 per month. So if you're not salaried, you're not off the hook in that one. But when you think about 2.7% of gross, it's not a small amount.
Yes.
It's significant. It's a significant amount. When you think about the content creators, these again are people who, in other words, the target, by and large, of the finance bill is for people who are already within the tax bracket. When you bring the issue of fuel levy, VAT, standardization,
cuts across.
It's been argued from a point of standardization that private sector charges 8% but claims 16%, and therefore government cannot continue to subsidize, quasi-subsidize. So let's put it at 16%. But this 16% that you are increasing, the primary consumers, at least from a day-to-day, are still people who have an income in one form or another, who can drive a vehicle, a car, and what have you. And even if they don't have an income, they own the means of transport and what have you, and therefore they will transfer this cost to the consumers and the replica effect. So on the reality of what this means, which is what the question you asked me, the finance bill, one is that I feel the timing is not right. And I think this is something that, as many of us as appeared before the Finance and National Planning Committee chaired by Honorable Kuria Kimani, we say that. We say the timing is not right because...
But will it be, just to be devil's advocate here, will it ever be right in terms of such, tightening of belts for people and increasing, the amount that they would be paying is something that will never be welcome?
Yeah, but you cannot argue only from a revenue side. The tightening of belt, why is it not both sides? I mean, Mark, I don't think it is right to just say the only people who must tighten their belts is Kenyans. What about government?
Right.
In this kind of a situation, what warrants raising the budget by 400 billion?
The narrative sold is we're looking inwards and not outwards.
No.
So we want to be able to raise, and I'm not speaking for the government. I'm not comfortable in any way. I'm just saying this is a narrative.
But let's face it.
Yeah.
Let's face the narrative.
The truth. Yeah.
The narrative is that we want to spend more. And for us to spend more, we have to tax more. But is that the only narrative?
Shouldn't be. There's also a widening of the tax base.
We can tighten our spending, which was the language that started with, the 300 billion, the discussion. There can be some tightening, which I still believe will happen. Because, and the reason why I believe it will happen is because the current state of the economy, and then you introduce all this raft of measures, adjusting NSSF, NHIF, you introduce a housing levy, which is not even, you've not even budgeted for the housing levy. Oh, by the way, there's no line that had been budgeted for, because this is money that is supposed to be raised for a specific fund, which has not been created. And many of us challenged it on that ground alone. There is no law, there is no policy, there is no target of how many houses we need. Even if you argue it from a point of employment creation,
for many,
there is no clarity on how much employment you're planning to create. So there are things I feel could have been sorted out to build confidence. And then, why I'm arguing about timing is that when you introduce all this raft of measures, what you do is that you introduce a shock in the economy. So first of all, any investor wanting to put in their money, they hold back because they still cannot figure out what is the actual cost of doing business. Because that's one thing that you have reorganized. Because employment is a direct cost,
yes,
you know, to the business. Two, at a time also when the cost of living is very high, and you introduce more taxes that basically just push that, especially any tax that has to do with, and think about it. So the amount of money that you're going to raise with this new raft of measures, at least from the records we have read, is 311 billion. The budget difference between the previous budget, of about 3.1 and about 3.3, and the current budget of about 3.6
right,
is almost similar figure. However, so you've raised your spending and you've raised your revenue target, but remember there is still a deficit. So this 311 billion that you raise more is from 2.1 to this 2.5. Please remember, it's from 210 to 250. But your spending, basically what you have done is that first of all you're trying to adjust your revenue because of your expenditure targets. Normally, so
it's not for the good reason. It's not for a good reason.
Normally,
yes,
you would argue that it should be the other way around. You look at realistically, what revenue can we collect? I'm making an argument that we want to look inwards. I had expected the government to say,
yes,
look here, we want to look inwards. We want to reduce borrowing. So what are we going to do? How much can we realistically collect in terms of tax revenues? X. Can we then try to rationalize our expenditure side,
yes,
to be able to conform? Because it's a time of tightening, and being able to pay. But you don't see that conversation. You also don't see a lot of conversation about what to do with wastage. I have talked about that before. And
there's been an admission from the advisors economically.
Yeah, saying that we are wasteful, we are unable to control our appetite, take us as we are, just give us more money. You give us more money, we'll spend it better. I mean, honestly.
Right. The numbers that you present, can be mind-boggling. But let's have an analogy for someone to understand. Compare what the government is doing now to a household.
Yeah.
What kind of household are we looking at? The household of Kenya and the government.
So I think it's important for us to appreciate that, at least from even the cabinet secretary numbers, 79% of Kenyans, if I remember correctly, actually earn below 24,000 Kenya shillings. So largely, and those, by the way, these employment numbers we are talking about are people within the guys who pay, do their tax returns, because he did break down those numbers. Then you have another, I think 15% that earns up to maybe about another 200,000 or thereabout. And then you have a tiny, about 1% of this group that is on the very extreme, other end, that earns more than 500,000. So on average, what you're talking about a household that basically gets this 30,000 on a regular day. And even if you come to the your usual hustler down here, and assume they make, on a good day, they make 300 bob, okay, even push it to 500 bob times 30, it's still 15,000 shillings. So that's the kind of household you're talking about. Now, if you remove the 1.5%, which is, they say it's a small money, but it's 300, if you do 1.5% of 20,000, it's 300 bob. 300 bob is still significant, because if it's movement, that's 300 bob is transport for a couple of days.
Yes.
3-4 days,
right,
for many people. That's food for 3 days in some households, and increasingly less, because now with unga at 200 bob, then and sugar now a kilo, at far much than that. So what we are saying is, and then you increase the cost of fuel. A majority of Kenyans still use, petrol,
yes,
in one way or another, or their movement. Whether you think about the production even at the sawmill, in the posho mill.
Yeah.
A lot of them are driven by diesel, especially in rural areas where the electricity connection is not as much. Of course, one expects a relief from the LPG, but remember that is really on, if I'm not wrong, on the cylinder.
The cylinder.
On the cylinder, it's not on the actual content. The actual content is still going to be, in a way, one way or another, affected by this 16%
of the fuel. Yes.
Of the fuel. Think about the cost of electricity. It's more than gone up by almost 30% in the last couple of days. You look at just your new bill. The units have been going down by, I think, in margins of 5 every other time.
What I could have got with probably 1,500.
Yeah, now you buy for 2,000 bob. Now you get about 59 units. I bought that yesterday. Initially, I got 80 units. So it's been going down, and the cost has gone up. The taxes have been reduced. Now we no longer get the breakdown of the taxes when you get your text. So all these things are coming to the same household. All these different costs are coming down to the household. Oil that was supposed, cooking oil that was supposed to, the cost was supposed to go down because government gave a tender for people to import duty-free. You've seen what has become of that story. Yep. Think about NHIF, the number of claims already being lodged, how many have not been paid, the scam that is ongoing right there. It can break somebody's heart.
Right. So tell me, personally, what kind of adjustments you're making with the finance bill now signed into law, personally? Yeah, what you can share.
I mean, at a personal level, really. Of course, I wouldn't consider myself to be badly paid, but I'm having to make certain decisions. One of the costs that has completely gone out of budget is fuel cost of just moving around. So even starting to think, okay, fine, does it still make sense perhaps to run, 2 cars, And I know households that are having to have that conversation. Does it make sense to stay within the neighborhood we stay in? Because that's a critical expense. When you think about NHIF, do we still need to pay private care, private insurance? If these new figures come in and pay, but more importantly, is the insecurity this is likely to create, even with, I don't know what the employers are thinking about. Yes. Are they thinking this now is becoming difficult to manage, the cost of doing business? So at a personal level, my family has had to is having a discussion, on how to manage different costs, because they are going up every other day, and children still have to go to school, and food has to be put on the table. On the table. At least we have not gotten to a point where we have to ration food, but I know homes where people have to ration food.
And if this is the reality for you, we can now speak to Kenyans on the impact that they should be expecting. You've mentioned something, and let's start there. The employers.
Yeah.
What things they're considering right now?
Yeah. So for employers, there are two major costs. So let's start with the private sector. The private sector, first of all, looking at the finance bill and all the provisions being made there, there is an increasing demand of tax administration. Yeah. You need to make tax returns within certain time. You need to comply with e-teams and what have you. They have to factor that cost, because if you have to now start thinking of almost having a tax person in-house, then you have to weigh what would that imply. If you have to pay housing levy, I think one of the good things that happened, I think it's good to note it where you observe it, is the relief that was given. That the housing levy is an allowable cost now to business, but we cannot ignore the fact that this I don't know what to call it anymore. This deduction, statutory deduction, still has no framework.
Yes.
So I am actually contributing to something I do not know where it will go, what it will be spent on. Now even the idea of returning, making a return after a couple of years is now gone. So that's for me is very, very, very concerning.
But what you're saying is, and I wanted to come out because of the impact aspect of it, is layoffs. And I'm not to be sadistic or gloom and doom.
Employers, Federation of Kenya Employers and did raise that matter when they appeared before the committee. I remember very clearly. They said this is increasing the cost of doing business, and the options left to businesses is to see how they can rationalize their employee numbers already. And this is not new, because when you look at the numbers of employed people actually have been going down.
Yes.
You know, we have not quite recovered to post-COVID, I mean pre-COVID.
COVID shocks, yes.
Pre-COVID shocks, you know. And you see, I mean, you,
yes.
You see, even in the media world,
I was on the receiving end of that, yeah.
You on the receiving end of that. People are being laid off. Companies are starting to think, or do we relocate? If we are doing business is going to be like this, then when you think about some of the other taxations, and I've listened to the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and KEPSA, they are saying, look here, the tax regime being introduced will make it very expensive to do business.
Yes.
And some of the production, for instance, you know, of cement is likely to be cheaper to actually buy. It seems to support actually importation than local production.
Yes.
In that sense. And once the production cost goes up, then basically you have to find a way to survive,
right.
You know, in business. Either shut the business and therefore send many people packing, or increase the cost of the good. And because, you see, taxation is a factor of incomes. Since incomes are not adjusting upwards, if anything, they are being threatened of being reduced and removed, then what basically you're saying, you're not sending confidence in the market. And I wish there was a bit more of a listening here of saying, let's tighten our belts both ways.
Yes. We
will cut our side. And then as we grow and we start demonstrating that these are the things we promised and we are doing them, we're doing them on a small scale.
Yes.
And now that you see, instead now, every day in the newspapers, you know, news, you're just seeing new revelations. The revelations last week, especially about these oils and what have you and what have you, you know, almost leave you thinking, okay, fine. Do I have, is there any more, you know, confidence to be able to be able? So for me, that's a big concern, that you cannot tax people beyond what they earn.
Okay.
Beyond the incomes. But there's another dynamic, Mark, that we seem not to be talking about a lot. Is the fact that any incomed Kenyan still runs a welfare system.
Yes.
I mean, you can count how many people depend on you, directly or indirectly. You know, your house help, that amount you pay her, most likely supports another 2 families.
Yes.
Where you do your car wash, supports another couple of families. Where you buy your groceries, you know, still supports. So there's a way in which one income, the children you pay for school fees, you know,
goes to the system of education.
Medical bills that you help to support. So all of us still run a quasi, you know, welfare system. Should we also be given perhaps an option to deduct those as allowable expenses? So that then the government just gets what they deserve. And then, so I feel that confidence building should have been given the space.
Got you.
2, none of us is refuting the fact that government is in a tight spot.
Right.
But the only way out of a tight spot is not taxing more. It's also saying, can we rationalize? Because then you risk a situation whereby you will only be able to collect so much.
And there's a breaking point.
And there's a breaking point.
Is there recourse? As we conclude, and I believe our next guest who also broke the internet on a development today, that is Willis Raburu, who's leaving the Royal Media Services as at the end of the week. As he makes his way here, probably he has a question for you in terms of what his greatest concern is. Is there recourse?
Yeah, there is.
Agenda. Tuliwaona.
Agenda.
Yeah.
Partly yes, imeenda, but partly no, because we have, as a people of Kenya, we have established for ourselves mechanisms in which we can recourse. One, of course, which I'm not too sure will be very effective right now, is a petition to Parliament to say the decision you made, we are not convinced, and therefore here is our petition, please hear us.
Yeah.
But there's also the option to go to court for public interest litigation. and you can argue this from any grounds. The Constitution allows you, anyone,
Yes.
to argue this matter from any grounds,
Right.
including that it's just impractical. So I feel that there is a recourse.
Yes.
But my hope is not so much that the focus will be on whether this revenue is raised or not. I want to hope that there is going to be a bigger focus on accountability, because even if nothing changed, like the finance bill for this year was the same as for last year, we are still losing so much money in wastage, in corruption, like utter theft.
Yeah.
Which interestingly, government officials have acknowledged that this is happening. I think the former president talked to us about the 2 billion amount. If you think about it, as we come to this so close, actually, if we lose 2 billion every day, it comes to about 730 billion. 730 billion is more than our budget deficit for next year. It's 2 times what we are planning to collect more in tax revenues. Because it's 300 times 2, 311 times 2 is 622 billion. So we cannot have this as just a one-sided conversation of all we need is to collect more money.
Yeah.
If the bucket is leaking, it doesn't matter how the speed of pouring water in and the volume.
Yes.
So my desire and my concern is that let's have a balanced conversation.
Right.
Let government demonstrate prudent usage of resources in all sectors. Unfortunately, what you're hearing, and I hope that the president will go.
And I want to give an opportunity for you to speak into the camera, and we'll cut this bit out just for you to speak to the president, to head of treasury, and I believe the team has Willis Raburu prepped to join us, because I want us to make the switch over seamlessly. Maybe he knows a secret we don't. Maybe he's going to a different country ambayo inapeana ushuru tofauti, because some people, I've actually seen articles of people saying, guys, start considering working in different countries and other jurisdictions where the conditions are better, because it's not looking like it's going to be better for Kenyans as the way the developments are coming in. You're well traveled. You've been to Germany and other places. Generally, people don't have a problem paying tax.
Correct.
If they see the result,
commensurate services
and the benefit to them in terms of services and what have you. So we're not having an issue here of taxation. It's just, where is this all going?
Bottom line, that's my point.
Right.
That we cannot continue to have a conversation that is purely revenue driven.
Yes.
It is not a problem of revenue. We don't have a revenue problem. Every year, as I have told you, and the numbers show this, we have had an increase in tax revenue of at least 10%. Now, very few of us as Kenyans have an income raise of 10%.
That's
true. But government has had an income raise year on year, of at least 10%. Some years as high as 13%. I think COVID year is the only time we had 1920s when we had a fair dip, because even government cut, took tax cuts. Cut the rates and what have you. And therefore, what we are having is a revenue problem. An expenditure problem, And this expenditure problem marinated with wastage and corruption.
There's one thing before I let you go, and again, just putting it out there, if Willis is ready, he can walk in, settle down with us as he tells us, ni nchi gani hii anaenda. Ametoka a well-paying job at the leading TV station. He must know something we don't in terms of how to make it. So kila mtu says they're trying to keep a job.
Not know anything. He's just decided.
But there's that thing about widening the tax base. Is that a solution? Is that a possibility? Because
widening the tax base, I think, is a good thing. Let me say this. What I have a problem with is deepening the rates.
Yes.
Is extracting more from those who are already paying. I feel that's unfair. You cannot have the burden just being shouldered by a few. There are still many Kenyans who don't pay tax.
I know, but these are people, the ones who are sitting in the decision-making levels, they're people who've gone to schools that you've gone to, they're learned people, they know it on theory, so why don't they propose it to a president who keeps saying every day that he's out for the interest of the nation.
Yeah, my sense is that perhaps it's not very politically entertained.
Okay.
To widen this tax base. I have, because the only way out is two things. One, provide public services as should be required.
Yes.
With the money that is already available. Because there's a lot of money available already.
Yes.
Two is ensure that the burden of taxation is shared.
Right.
Equitably across all persons.
Right.
You know? But one gets a sense that then all you need to do is get a payslip and you are captured. The lady is watching.
Yeah.
You know? Because a lot of the focus right now is people who have a payslip. You know, people who have you know, something at the end of the month, they're on payroll. I think there is a possibility to widen this. It's not perhaps very popular, but it's the only way. But all those countries we are talking about
Yes.
have had to do both, have had to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share, but also that when you need water, there is water. When you go to public schools, they are functional. When you go to public hospitals, they are functional. When you're on social health insurance scheme, you go to any health facility, it pays for you. You know, so there's no place where you will end up not getting public services because it's a transaction.
Right.
This one is there's nothing like goodwill. There's no favor here. I pay my taxes. I expect public services.
Yes.
In return. And I think this is the struggle even for those who sometimes say, I must find a way not to pay these taxes because they're saying, I still have to pay for education separately.
Yep.
I still have to pay for healthcare.
Because of poor infrastructure, I have to fix my car constantly and what have you. So I'm still incurring that cost.
You know, and all these things. You know, your car is well. You hit a pothole, there it is.
Right. And even the car that you are buying, the rate, the amount of tax that you pay on it.
Precisely.
Import.
So I feel the way forward, and that's my ask.
Tafadhali zungumza na His Excellency the President as we prepare to have Willis Rugo.
And to the government of the day.
Answer na, Mr. President, tafadhali. We want to put this separately and the government.
Mr. President, I ask you, please keep your word. Please keep your word. Kenyans are looking up to you to be able to provide the requisite public services. But two, please rein in corruption and wastage of public resources. Because all the numbers, which I'm sure you have seen, I had an opportunity to present them to you too, show that if you only rein in the wastage, the corruption, the theft, you have more money than even the revenue bills will collect. And that will create confidence, and that will ensure that all of us, but thirdly, give the economy the time to heal and to grow, because that is where, you know, we'll be able to collect the taxes that we want. And for Kenyans, let's take our fair share. You know, let's not be part of the wastage just because it's public resources. Let us build to ourselves the country we desire to live in. And I believe it's possible. Thank you.